Well, first, I'm Gary Edwards. I am the Vice President of Peachtree section. And in Peachtree section, the Vice President's in charge of events, so it's appropriate that I be given this presentation. I also like to welcome our contingent from Carolina's section, led by Jane Martinez. Thank you, Jane, for coming, and we appreciate that. We enjoy our very close relationship with Carolina section. And let me now turn the floor over for a few moments to our President, Steve Chapman, for some welcoming remarks.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, terrific. As Gary mentioned, I'm Steve Chapman. As of I took over as president on October 1st. I just want to welcome everyone to this meeting. This is a really critical meeting for us to be able to set up a lot of our events for next year, through ideation to just kind of having folks step up to the plate, if you will, as far as wanting to participate by organizing an event. So Gary's done a masterful job putting today's event together. And I guess at some point we'll be in breakout sessions to get more granular in terms of the different topics that we'll cover. But just want to say thank you very much, everyone. Peachtree section cannot operate without volunteers. And so we very much value and appreciate everyone for volunteering their time. So Gary, back to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. And let me go off into screen sharing for my PowerPoint presentation. And bear with me for a moment because this doesn't always work the way you predict it's going to work. And so let me find my PowerPoint and share, and then come up with screen share, and then see what shows up. Okay, what are you all seeing? What looks like a first slide?
Yes, Gary, we're seeing the first slide, not your notes or anything, so you're good.
Yeah.
Good. And
I see Brett going really fast.
Yeah, for those of you that have seen this presentation before, there's a picture of a white SL in it with a person I didn't know. So I slid a picture of a white SL in it with a picture I knew. So there you are, Brett. But so first, welcome. This is our event planners workshop. And of course, my chat window and my participant windows are in front of where I need to be looking here. Just a second. All right. So, why are we here? We are here to do, okay, slide advance. All right. As an overview, we're here to talk about how we plan events, and then to break out and actually plan the events and fill out our 2021 calendar, which already has some stuff on it. And the other piece of this is our event planners kind of become our future section leaders. So this is an important process for us. And I will point out too, I mentioned the importance of diversity and flexibility in planning. I'll talk about event diversity about 2 slides down. Let me talk about flexibility in planning. Last time we did this, we met in person in January 2020, put together a really great schedule. And then as we went through, we ended up canceling and revising and changing things on the schedule. And we learned about flexibility in a way that I never anticipated. But we also learned about doing different types of events that we had never thought of doing. And the result was we executed a schedule in 2020 that had about 50% more events on it than what we planned, which I'm very pleased and proud of. And I also learned an awful lot about events this year. So for those of you that have seen this presentation before, it may look similar, but I've tweaked it in a number of ways to include the points that I've kind of learned as we do events. And one of the things I learned in the area of flexibility is that, just because you plan something at the beginning of 2020 doesn't mean you can't change and add things in. And we did a lot of events this year that we scheduled on pretty short notice, and it all worked really well. So flexibility, just because we write it down today on our calendar doesn't mean that we can't add more stuff later. Okay. So, why is this important, and what are we after here? We're going to talk about how to plan and execute and wrap up a complete event. And then we're going to break off into breakup groups and hopefully come up with some events. Okay, here's my why is this important slide. And I think this is really an important thing because, if you look at MBCA, nationally, the national organization service they deliver to the members is the Star magazine. What is the service that the section delivers? In my mind, primarily the section delivers events. And what type of events should a section deliver? Well, I think given that we have a wide diversity of members, we ought to provide a wide diversity of events. And they ought to be targeted at not only the members who are currently participating in events. Realistically, about 20% of your members actually participate and about 80% don't. So we not only have to target the ones that currently participate, but we also have to go after the ones that currently don't. And oh, by the way, there's that big universe of people that own Mercedes that should be members that aren't. So we really ought to be targeting them. And so we have to come up with a selection of events that not only makes our current participating members happy, but reaches out to the rest of them. And the limit on how many events you can pull off is how many event planners you have to do the events. And so that's why this event planners workshop and event planning process is really important to us. In my vision is a series of all these types of events: social, concourse, rally, technical, touring, performance driving, all these type of events. But we're limited in the amount of people that we have to put them on. Okay, so that's really important. Okay, here's what I kind of expect to do today. This presentation will take an hour to an hour and a half. We'll do a little break and do breakout groups, and we'll split into groups. And you saw an email on what the tentative groups would be. And the groups in the separate rooms talk about what kind of events they're willing to plan and when they're willing to plan them. Then we'll come back to the main room, report out, and say what dates we want. And I'll kind of type those into the master calendar, and we'll end the day with a master calendar of events and a group of planners willing to plan those events. We'll see how fast I can type. So for event planning, and I should say, by the way, for questions during the presentation, use the chat window, and Diana will help me see that I've got questions, and I'll try to answer them as we go on. There's plenty of time for questions. If you have a question, ask the questions. We'd be glad to answer them. We have a lot of experienced event planners in our group today. So if I can't answer the question, somebody here can almost certainly answer the question. And if we can't, we'll go look it up and get back to you. But we want questions. We want folks to feel comfortable doing event planning. Okay. And so kind of, these are the steps I'm going to go through. And let's see. Suddenly I can't advance the slide. Why can't I advance the slide? There, use that button. But so this is kind of the details I'm going to be going through, from concept to planning to funding and managing and wrapping up. All these little pieces we'll talk about. If you see something I don't cover well enough, again, just make sure you ask. Okay, so the event concept. And I remember the first event I did, and it was a place that I'd always wanted to go. It just kind of turned into, well, let me take 25 of my closest friends with me. And so I kind of opened it up and did it as a Peachtree event, and it was just really a lot of fun. And so that's one way to approach an event, just something you want to do and that you think would be of interest to other folks that are similar to you. But there's plenty of ways to go after events, including these tour. This is pretty much for touring events. And of course, there's the other types of events, the drives, the rallies, the socials. But your imagination is really about the only limit. That, and we're not going to do events that are, say, illegal, unethical, or immoral, or bring discredit on the club. But other than that, as long as the event can be done and break even financially, we can do it. You shouldn't expect us to be saying no to events that are reasonable events. Now, when you see this slide, you realize the last time that we showed this slide, I've added something in here. I don't know that we've ever done a fundraising event, but there are regions or sections that fund themselves using fundraising events. And that's something that we could do because the budget is pretty tight these days. I also mentioned track events in here. We've been going to autocrosses from another club across town, and that have been very good. And there's some track events by other clubs that I kind of wanted to see us go to in the next year, and I kind of want to run one too. I'll also mention model specific events. The previous year we did 107 event and a AMG event. This year we did a combined 107 and 129 event, and model specific events tend to be pretty popular. And I would certainly like to do some more AMG type events too, because I think that's kind of an untapped area of membership, folks that we haven't yet attracted that we ought to be attracting. Okay. So let's just talk about selecting an event and what you ought to be thinking about when you're looking at a location for an event. We all have pretty nice cars, and we're all going to be worried about where we park the cars. So you got to think about, where we're going to park them. Obviously, restroom. If we're going to go to a place for say a weekend event that doesn't really have overnight accommodations and places to eat, then it's probably a day event instead of a weekend event. Shade and air conditioning, for example, concourse that we did this year at Lanier Raceplex. It was a nice overcast day. It was the place that didn't have shade, and so part of the planning of that one was take some tents to provide shade just in case, or have places for air conditioning if people get too hot. And some other things to be thinking about as you set up the event. Most of us don't really like to go on dirt roads, and so if you're going to put together an event that has dirt roads in it, well, one, probably ought to avoid dirt roads unless it's a off-road events for G-Wagons and four-wheel drive vehicles. But if you're going to use a dirt road, put it in the description, because it might change who comes or what cars we bring. And today, and for probably maybe even at least the next 6 months or more, we're going to have to think about both virus precautions and virus restrictions. And virus precautions are things like, what I did when we were going to do this one in person. I bought a box of 50 masks and was counting hand sanitizer, and made sure the room was big enough and that you could social distance. And virus precautions would tend to have you favor events that are outside. So that's probably going to be with us for quite a while yet. The other piece, though, I mentioned virus restrictions, and this is a little bit newer to me. It was brought home about a week and a half ago when I tried to go to dinner meeting a friend down in Thompson, Georgia, and we were on our third restaurant before we found a restaurant where you could actually sit down and eat inside. And so you can't really assume that where you're going to go today is going to be operating like it used to operate. And so you really always have to check ahead nowadays. And did they change their hours? Are they allowing you to come and sit down in the dining room? Is there a number of visitors limit? For our event last Saturday, we found that Anna Ruby Falls was limiting cars to 65 in their upper parking lot, which kind of made for a bit of congestion since everybody in the world was out on the road last Saturday. So that's kind of new, and hopefully the next time we give this presentation we can eliminate those two bullets. But for right now, it's our reality, and it can be really a challenge. I'll tell you, I emailed out our event planning guide, which is a 2018 product, and it's still very good except for one or two things. And a great majority of pages in that are dedicated to an event planner's checklist. It's a very good checklist. And especially the first time you do an event, I encourage you to use the checklist because it helps you think about all of the things that you need to be thinking about. I certainly used it the first time I planned an event. I don't use it as much today. Okay. Now, event classifications, and the purpose of these classifications is to allow you to understand what you have to do as far as liability and insurance. And I use the A, B, and C abbreviations on our schedule just to kind of remind me and to remind the planners of what type of event it is, so that you get focused on the type of liability issue you come up with. Group A events are the like zero risk events where you go to a tech session or board meeting or something like that, social event. Group B are ones that involve some type of driving, and so it increments up the risk a little bit. And Group C is where you're doing maybe a track event or driver's ed, so it's a little bit more risk than B. And so the requirements are then for B and C, you have to have the participants sign a liability waiver. And the liability waiver is available on the MBCA website. You can also get packets of them or pads of them. If you call the National Business Office, they'll just send you a pad. That's what I usually carry around. So all Group B and C events require the liability waiver. That just means you have everybody sign the liability waiver up front when you come in. Group C events are ones that typically require a certificate of insurance. A certificate of insurance is a piece of paper that you give to the location that says you have event liability insurance. And you don't have to pay for that. The National Business Office coordinates it through their insurance underwriter. There is a form on the MBCA website that's supposed to be submitted 60 days prior to the event. Now, it turns out, since we've scheduled some events within a 60-day window, the National Business Office has been very helpful, and they can actually turn these around really pretty quickly. But as soon as you know your event and you have you're going to do an event, you have a date, and you have a place, and they need a liability waiver, go ahead and fill that in so it's not a last-minute item. The other good reason to do that in advance is sometimes there's a little bit of negotiation as far as what the site requires versus what we would normally provide. So sometimes you iterate a little bit to make sure that the event site can see that our coverage meets their requirements. And the other thing I want to point out on this one, a certificate of insurance is only required if the location requires it. And so, and this is the reason that, say, a concourse or a car show is categorized as a Group C event, because you go to a location typically, and the location will very often want to see that you have liability insurance. If the location does not request it, you don't need it. And so for, say, our Halcyon show, which we did back in June on relatively short notice, event location didn't ask for it, we didn't provide it. For our karting event, for the urban survival training, and for the concourse, we did Linear Raceplex, we did provide certificates of insurance. So it depends on whether it's requested or not. It's easy to do, but if it's needed, you don't need to be getting to the last couple of days before it and they ask for it and you don't have it. So think about this in advance, because
Yeah, you should ask. Gary, I would add that you should ask the venue, like when you first plan with them.
Yeah, you don't want to be surprised
whether or not.
at the last.
Yeah, you don't want to be surprised, right?
And most are pretty upfront with it and what their requirements are. And the other thing that I learned this year is about the terms of participation. If you go to the MBCA website, there's a terms of participation form that you're just supposed to give out for B and C events. I didn't know this existed, but and it looks like something that you require a signature on, but it doesn't. And the funny thing about it, and the thing that makes this stand out a little bit in my mind, is it has a place on it. I'm reading from one of them right now. I certify, understand, and agree that if I am driving, a passenger, or otherwise participating in the events, the vehicle I am driving or in which I am a passenger in the events is insured with at least $100,000 per person bodily injury and property damage insurance. And I highlight that because that's in excess of what the minimum that Georgia requires. So it is conceivable that you could have people participating in your events that don't actually meet the MBCA terms of participation. So just keep that in the back of your mind. It's a useful thing to throw in the waiver part on the motorsport registration page. And for events like that on motorsport registration, what I've been doing is copying the entire MBCA waiver of liability into that waiver and copying the entire terms of participation into that waiver to try to cover it. Okay.
Gary, we also print that terms of participation in our newsletter.
Okay, got it. Thank you. There's a question from Steve. Should we be having participants who sign up for PCA Autocross sign an MBCA waiver as well? And the answer to that is actually yes. And Steve, you weren't at the last PCA Autocross, but we actually did that in the last one. And we'll do that tomorrow. Good question.
Yeah, there's terms of participation, and then there's also the liability waiver. They're two separate documents.
And I'm not particularly worried about terms of participation for the PCA Autocrosses, but since we're really advertising it as a MBCA event and go to it, we need to be doing a waiver. Okay. So bylaws.
Gary,
This,
Gary, the difference in insurance liability, if you don't have 100,000, it probably then falls on you, the individual,
it
because
does.
what's probably happening is the Mercedes liability is above 100,000. Usually it's a secondary insurer. Usually those associations insurances are secondary insurance that's over a minimum, just like a home liability insurance. So it's probably, we could be liable for the difference between if somebody in Georgia only has 50,000 and the Mercedes liability of 100,000. So I think it's more than just having people sign this. I think they've got to, I don't think just them signing it, if they didn't have the insurance, would protect you.
No, they need to be informed and they need to have that limit of liability.
Well, they need to have that limited liability to participate.
Yes. Yeah, that really is the requirement. You are correct. And I think we need to be very clear when we put that in MSR. And I may not have been clear enough on some of those.
I guess I'm just saying, you know, if you look at all these things, you just check them, you don't really read them. And if I think, and I believe what you're saying is maybe we should emphasize that more in the sign up.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I need to do that. And we all need to think about that.
Especially for, I'd say, as we're starting to do track events and stuff like that we haven't been doing in the past. So that's, you know, there's more risk with those kind of events.
Yeah, well, I think the mountain driving events are probably the ones where we're most likely to have an issue with that. But and you know, to get back to the slides, you know, our bylaws say that you have to limit events to Mercedes-Benz automobiles and Mercedes-Benz club members. Now, one thing that you can do, that we can do, is by board of directors majority vote to waive that. And we have waived that for driving events for the year 2021. And the primary consideration of that was the mountain driving events that we have been doing and plan to do every month are key membership recruitment events. And thus it's really useful to reach out to those that aren't currently in the club, or maybe even don't even drive Mercedes-Benz automobiles yet. The other times you might want to think about opening these up, events, say, where you have a minimum number of participants and you're not sure that you're really going to get enough. You know, we did that for the karting event and for the urban survival event last year. Or events that the expenses are so high that you have to amortize them across a larger number of vehicles than you think you're going to have. We see that in the PCA autocrosses, where they limit it to 70 cars, but they probably have only about 50 or so Porsches, and then have, you know, 20 or so other cars. And we've been taking, what, 6 to 8 Mercedes there, which actually helps them out, although it would fill up probably without us.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah. Misty.
One other just additional item, which you had mentioned for 2021, the board has given blanket approval for allowing other cars and non-members to participate. That also covers the remainder of 2020. I'm actually looking for a drag strip to try and squeeze in an acceleration run, but it'll be one of those things that pops up in a week, just depending.
Steve, that was just driving events. It wasn't all events.
Yeah, it was driving events. But
Well, correct. No, I understand that. Yep, driving events.
You know, Atlanta Motor Speedway actually uses their front straight for a drag strip. They used to do that on Friday nights, but but they're expensive. Anyway, so and the other thing I want to mention is that if we were to do fundraising events, we might very well want to open events up to non-Mercedes and non-club members, because it would enhance our ability to do fundraising. I know we really haven't done a fundraising event yet, but it might be something to keep in the back of our mind because the budget's pretty tight. All right, so into the planning area. Now, the vice president in Peachtree, as events coordinator, owns the events calendar. And so as you are thinking about an event, talk to the vice president about what dates are appropriate, and then kind of lock in a date and finalize it with the location venue. And of course, we've been pretty flexible about changing dates if we need to change dates. And I'm going to try to deconflict events from other big automotive events that are happening as much as I can from Carolina section events that are close, close enough to get to, and things that just kind of make sense. It's kind of funny though. Steve asked me one time, well, how many events would you schedule? And I'd say, well, when I run out of days, we'll have to start scheduling some on top of each other. But I have no limit on how many events I'm willing to try to schedule. I'd fill every day in the calendar if I could pull it off with event planners. But in any case, what you'll see when I pop up the calendar is I've tried to throw in things like Amelia Island Concours and Hilton Head Concours and the other things that we probably don't want to schedule events on top of. But and it's always useful to know those things, and I don't have perfect vision on all that, so let me know when you see things that may potentially impact our event planning. Now, the other thing I want to pop up here is or address is obtaining help. And if you're a first-time event planner, don't be deterred by how all this stuff I'm talking about here. There are many people in this room, virtually or real, that will help you. And would you like to have a co-organizer, a helper, a mentor, or just somebody to talk to about the event? All this is available. I can help you do that. I can help get somebody to help you with the event. But we don't want to scare you away because of all the details and how much we're talking about here today. We really want you to plan events and enjoy planning events. It's actually, I enjoy doing events. I guess you maybe have figured that out. And it's fun, it's rewarding. And we need a lot of people to be doing these to give the diverse type of events to our members. Other thing to think about, always have an event photographer, because you always want pictures of the event. And what you're going to find out is if you're busy running the event, you probably are going to forget to take pictures. And so grab somebody else to do an event photography for your event. I often ask my wife Cheryl to do photography because she's a really good photographer. And I can also do photography if I'm not the event planner. So just think about that. Always have an event photographer because you always want pictures of the event. And in fact, you can be flashing pictures up on Facebook while the event's going on. It helps to publicize what we're doing. Okay, how much do you charge for your event? Well, first, nowadays, we really need to be planning our events so they break even financially. There was a time that we used to have an event stipend. Cheryl's being kind enough to refill my coffee. Thank you. We used to fund a $300 stipend per event, and we just don't have the budget to do that anymore. If we did, with the number of events we're doing, we would not be able to afford it anyway. So you need to plan your event to make it break even. The other thing to think about is the value of the event. If you plan an event such that the price is so high that it exceeds the people's perception of the value of the event, they're not going to come. And you kind of devalue your event if you price it, below what the kind of perceived value of the event is. And that could deter people from coming. So there's kind of a right place to price the event. And as you're working this out, you might find that you can't get there from here. I remember when I was doing the Columbus event, I wanted to do a dinner at the National Infantry Museum. And I started pricing the price of the room and the fact that they really kind of do meals for 50 to 100 people, and I was expecting 25. And you start dividing the total cost by the number of people and realize it didn't make sense. And so I couldn't do it that way because it would have been too expensive and nobody would have wanted to do it. And as I get a little farther down in this brief, I'll mention dinners. Dinners are almost the hardest thing you find people doing in doing events. And I recall one that one of our officers did where it was a big event. It was a very large number of people. and the costs were pretty high. The fixed room costs and the per person costs were high, and the amount of people signing up were not as large as anticipated, and the event planner had to make the really hard decision to go back and ask for more money from the people who signed up, which is a really difficult thing to do. It was really the right thing to do, but you know, it's not something you really want to get yourself in a position of. All right, enough said on that one, right? We're going to come back to that though. Oh, it's really full.
Yeah.
And new cup of coffee. Okay, see if I can spill it on myself here. Okay, so contracts. Contracts is a really important issue. When you book a venue for something, they're almost always going to want, and you should want to have a contract between them, so you know exactly what to expect on both sides. Contracts have got to be between the venue and Peachtree section MBCA, not you personally. And you're not authorized to sign a contract unless the section president has approved it in writing. And the in writing part is to cover your butt, because you know, if you sign a contract without the section president's approval, then you could be held personally financially responsible. So it's really important for any contracts that you consult with me, and we'll get the section president's approval in writing. And that's a control to make sure that we do not increase the financial liability of the section beyond which we have approved. When you're doing events, you've got to consider the financial risk to the club. And so think about negotiating contracts that reduce or minimize the financial risk. You know, one way of approaching it, room blocks where people book rooms individually and where there's a release date for the block. You know, you can often negotiate a good room rate with the hotel if you plan to give them a bunch of rooms. But if there's a release date far enough in advance of the event so that they can have a pretty reasonable expectation of filling the rooms, then they're probably not going to need to charge us anything. And so that's an example of doing something that benefits the club that has no financial liability or no financial risk. And back to dinners. I mean, dinners are often the hardest thing you do. And the easiest way to do a dinner is just have individual checks, if you can pull that off. As the group gets bigger, that gets harder and harder. And I found that you start getting above about 25 people and it gets really difficult to get a room without a room fee or a restaurant that's willing to do individual checks. So it's easiest to do an event and with the least financial risk to do individual checks at a individual dining. If you really have to do feeding 100 people or 200 people or something like that, there are going to be some costs in there, and it's probably going to be fairly expensive, and you have to be pretty certain that you're really going to have that many people. The other piece there is most events will have some type of drop dead date by which you can cancel and not incur a financial liability. And after that, you incur a liability. And you got to know what that date is and look closely at the registrations. And if you don't have enough folks and you're about to pick up some liability that you can't pay for, then that's kind of when you cancel the event. Okay, so for budgeting, there's an event budget worksheet that's also in the event planning guide that'll really help you out as you're doing this planning. And what it helps you do is to remember those things you may not have thought about. Like commemorative giveaways on this, or motorsport registration fees, which I tend to forget about till recently. And remember, the goal is to make the event break even, and this helps you do that. Oh, it looks like we have some questions, comments. Oh yeah, holidays.
Now, Brett was asking about events that repeat annually, and I responded, that we do have some that seem to repeat annually, but there's no rule that they have to repeat annually.
Yeah, we've got a tradition of doing a fall foliage drive at about the peak of fall foliage season, and it's named in the memory of one of our key members. So everything we do is really flexible, and it's to meet the needs of our members and of course those that aren't members. But say Amelia Island Concourse is the same every year. There's typically a dinner the night before the Amelia Island Concourse that a lot of us go to. But anyway, but everything's flexible. Okay, so for detailed stuff, and this is something I learned this year. I kind of overlooked a piece of this. Motorsport registration.
I guess,
Joe?
Gary, if I got trying this space for you. For 2021 and from planning, and we don't have a budget yet, and we currently have a rule that everything has to cover itself. The free, we traditionally have in June, member appreciation luncheon, which is free to all members. So if and it's yearly. So we're, as we plan even today, we might want to put that on the schedule, but understand that it may not be free, or we have to budget that as we put the budget together between now and January. And the holiday party, sort of the same way. We used to subsidize part of the holiday party to a pretty good extent. And I think this year is the first year that it's not subsidized. And Ernie has negotiated a really good price. So we're almost lower than the normal fee. So there is a way to get around this as long as you can collect a fee. But I presume we'll put those on the calendar for 2021.
Yeah, I'm going to wait for Ernie's input on those pieces, and he's not here today, unfortunately.
Well, yes, he is. He came in.
His name
Oh,
is
he
down
came
at the bottom
here.
of my screen.
Yeah,
Oh,
he's
good.
there. He's there.
Oh, good. Okay,
Yeah,
good.
I mean, I think we should put them, on the calendar, and, we're just going to have to figure out how to fund them. But we don't know the answers to that as being a member of the budget committee. And we're not going to know the answer to some of that until after the national board meeting on what monies we might have available.
But my suggestion or my recommendation would be we put them on the calendar and perhaps plan for them, so at least we have some numbers to provide to the budget committee.
I agree.
And then if we can't cover it, then we just drop them from the calendar.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. All right, see, any other questions? No. All right, so let me tell you something I learned this year about motorsport registration fees. You always have to think about this as you're pricing your event, and it's generally 5.5% plus 30 cents per person or per registrant. If the event is free, then there's no motorsport registration fee, but there's also a $1 minimum. I priced an event we did this year at $3, which meant that 33.33% of the fees went to motorsport registration, which I didn't think was really very good. And so I thought that $3 was really a bad choice for a fee, and I'll probably never do that again. But always think about that, because if you just price it right at what the event cost and you don't think about this, you're going to be under by 5.5% or so. Now, other requirements, lunch orders, tours, you can set it up so that you can do all kinds of neat things with motorsport registration, like have what type of lunches everybody wants and all that, if that's necessary. Sometimes for larger events, you'll have a restricted menu, say with 3 items, and you want to put that on the motorsport registration and get it in advance. That can all be done. The registrar is usually the event planner, and the way you normally have this set up is the registrar gets an email for each person that registers, so they can kind of keep track of how things are going. And one of the points I want to make with motorsport registration, we use it for all of our events. The event planner is responsible to coordinate the setup. We'll make you an organizer so that you can see it, but I don't want you to be scared away from doing event organizer just because of motorsport registration. I can set it up for you, Doug can set it up for you, Diana can set it up for you, or we can give you enough training so that you can do it yourself. The most useful thing I had in helping me figure out motorsport registration is Diana being willing to sit down with me for about an hour and walk me through it, sharing screens on the computer. But this is something that you're not going to learn from a few slides in a PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to show you a few slides of this here, but don't expect to come away. You really have to be poking and prodding into motorsport registration to understand how to do it. And I am still learning things on it. And I ask Doug and Diana for help pretty frequently. The other piece of motorsport registration, if you're doing the registration, there's some quirks to it. One of the things that I've kind of learned is you ought to register yourself first as soon as you've got it put together, just to kind of make sure it works the way you think it's going to work. And it's still hard to anticipate all the various perturbations, and there can be some glitches in it that you don't see that somebody else sees. So my point there is that if you're the registrar, you need to be available to answer questions via email, via phone. I normally don't answer phone calls from people that are not in my contact list. And in the days leading up to an event, I'll pretty much answer the phone anytime, because it could be somebody asking a question about the event. And I want to make sure that we provide them good customer service. And the other piece of that is that a lot of folks wait till just about the last minute before registering. So, you shouldn't get so concerned if you don't have registrants if you're a month out. But you've seen, I'm sure, emails from me about getting nervous about having enough people to put on the event. And, our tools allow you to communicate with the membership to kind of prompt membership, especially on events where you're worried about making some type of minimum. I've also seen sections, I saw a section cancel event in January that was in April because it didn't have enough signups. Maybe there is a reason for that, but it seemed a little weird to me. I hope I don't do that. That question.
Ruben's got a question. I'm not sure if I totally understand. Ruben, maybe you're talking about
Yeah.
track.
So for MSR, there's a list of registrants before the event happens, but after the date of the event, I don't think you can see the list in there unless the person who is like in charge of that event on MSR inputs who attended and who didn't attend.
No, you can do that.
You can go back. You can go back 5-10 years. You can see every event we've done.
Oh, really?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You just have to go.
Whenever I go and look, maybe it's in the organizers settings somewhere.
I could show you. I could show you how to get there.
Yeah, no, it can be done.
We can talk about that later. That's not important.
Yeah, the other neat thing about MSR, motorsport registration, and I'll get to the fact that you can send emails to the registrants, but that email list kind of is still there. And so, if I wanted to send an email to all the people that have ever been to one of our video tech sessions, I could just go in and pick all those lists and send it through MSR. It's really a neat tool. And so it remembers those type of things, and it remembers all the events you've been to. I can click on Ruben Howard and see this whole list of things that you've signed up to. And so I can then kind of gauge what type of events might be of interest to that particular member. It's really a neat tool, but it's kind of complex too.
Gary?
Yes, who's that, Joe?
If I can go back to fees for just a minute.
Fees. Yep.
And you might have said this and I might have went right over my head. And you just talked about all the advantages of having people registered on MSR and being able to send out emails. And that was especially valuable as we did the Zoom stuff. But I just want to mention that if your event is free, there's no charge on MSR. So it's really valuable to use it even if you're doing a free event. Now, if you notice up there on the slide, it still says $1 minimum. It costs you $1. If you only charge $1, they take the whole dollar. If you charge $2, they take one of the two. So when you price something, a $5 fee on MSR, they're taking 20% of the fee. So don't think that it's not trivial. And you don't start breaking even until about $15 a person, where the fee becomes less of an impact.
Yeah, you'll probably never see me
Just something to think about, because charging, a real small number for an event really doesn't pay off if you can do it for free.
Yeah, well, right, but Joe, let me just comment about this, and I think we've had this discussion that, you know what, charging something gets a little bit of buy-in. So even if you do charge
Absolutely.
$5, so there is a trade-off that yes, you give $1 back to MSR, but now you get a buy-in for people to show up. So, you know, I think is worth it.
Yeah, and you'll probably never see me charge less than $10 for an event in the future. But let me make one other point. We give a lot of authority and autonomy to event planners. And so it's really up to the event planner how much the event planner charges for the event. And, you know, if something needs to be done with the event, say move the date or cancel the event because we're concerned about virus precautions or a conflict or concerns that not enough people are going to be signing up for it. You know, often the event planner will consult me or consult the president, but what we tend to do is do what the event planner recommends, because the event planner is the one that's closest to the event, and we don't believe in giving the event planners excessive rudder orders on how to do the event. And recognize that as the event planner. I mean, you really have a lot of decision-making authority with the event, and I think that's the right way to do it. And I'm really proud that we don't really interfere very much in what the event planners do. All right. So some other just things to think about costs. I've mentioned ordering off a menu is a lot easier. Setup costs, name tags, you know, those type of things you don't think about, but you know, you almost always need pins and name tags and stuff like that. And I want to mention Peachtree collectibles. We try to put together a little gift for each of the people in a lot of our events, and it tends to be a little 4x6 framed picture that the picture has something to do with the event, and it's got some wording on it that says what the event was. And we tend to use the same frame, so a person that goes to a lot of our events can have, you know, a wall of these things that match, and we tend to make them attractive. And the intention is to be a reminder of the fun you had at our events, so you'll want to come to more of our events. And I encourage event planners, if this fits within your event framework, try to do this. It's really a neat little thing to do, and most people don't expect it. And so that they'll walk away with a little gift from us that reminds them of what fun they had on the event. The other things that's a really nice touch are door prizes. And door prizes that have something to do with Mercedes-Benz are really the best door prizes. If you can get something from our sponsors or from dealers or something like that, if you can arrange for most people to walk away with something, it really works quite well.
Gary, I think we had a really good question in chat from Brett. We're talking about registration fees, about what happens if we have to cancel an event. Motorsports does return the registration fee. So if we cancel an event and they have a great new feature, that we can actually just do mass credit for everybody who signed up for the event.
Yeah, there've been a lot of event cancellations due to the virus, so they've accommodated that pretty well. In fact, they've even sent out things about how to do it easily. I mean, they're really good people, and they answer your questions pretty well too. Okay, the registration fee, you know, the attendance thing, you kind of have to assume, make some thought experiments here on, well, if I only have this many people, what will it cost? If I have this many people, what will it cost? And, you know, what are people willing to actually pay for the event? But, sometimes, you have a minimum. The urban survival training we did had a minimum of 10, and I was really sweating getting 10. And the agreement on that one was we'd pay this amount, whether we had 10 or not. And so I did not want to have to do that. And it actually worked out just fine. But it can be a little nervous as you get up to the event if you've got a minimum and you hadn't gotten to the minimum yet. All right, this is the kind of slide. You should always charge something for the event. Not always the case. We didn't charge anything for this event, but I've noticed that people tend to have more buy-in to an event if you charge some type of nominal fee than if you don't. What I've seen in the video teleconferences is the ones that were free, the registrations were a lot bigger than the actual participation, and the ones we charged a fee for, even a small fee, the registrations and the participants numbers were a lot closer. And you should consider the value pricing of the event. I considered, for example, the George Murphy Tech Sessions. That's a, $10 or $15 value event. And we did them free for a while, and then we did $3, and we did $10. And of the, probably several hundred people that, we probably had 1,000 people that got that notification. I had 3 or 4 that complained about the $10 fee. I think most Mercedes folks can afford a $10 fee, honestly. And I'll get back to the Peachtree. We used to budget an event substitute, and we're not doing that anymore. So that's the reason that the events have to break even. And if we're not going to break even, we need to have them in our budget. For example, the luncheon that we will typically do. I mean, that is a expensive item. We didn't do it this year, both because of virus and because of the budget. And so we're going to have to put that in our budget for the next year if we intend to do it. Let me go to the next one. Now, every once in a while, you'll get a check. I've seen a couple of checks for events, and you just got to make sure that you go ahead and put those people into MSR so they'll get the emails and all that. And, event organizer can do it. I can do that for you. But you really want them to be in MSR because it makes it much easier for you to manage the numbers. You don't see this much anymore, but you get a few of these.
Yeah, but we talked about eliminating that from the newsletter, didn't we?
Yeah, the forum, but you'll still see some people. They'll call you up or they'll send you an email and say they can't get an MSR or for some reason they'll want to send you a check. So you'll still see checks.
The other thing, Dean, is I'll tell you, we have a couple of people that like to come to the holiday luncheon, and Ernie, you know who they are, that they just mail a check, okay? And they do have an email address, but I've had a few that literally don't have an email address, so just be aware of that. You can still put them into MSR without an email address, but if you're sending out notifications, of instructions to people and you have somebody on your list like that, you're gonna need to get a hold of their telephone number and call them. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen.
Yeah, and there's so few that you can actually deal with it. I mean,
yeah, right, exactly.
onesies and twosies. Okay, so the refund policy, I said we gave the event planner a lot of autonomy. The event planner determines the refund policy for the event, and it's very specific to the event. It's really, have we spent money on behalf of that member? If we've spent the money on behalf of the member and you can't get it back, then you probably shouldn't issue a refund. If you can issue a refund, you ought to. And especially now with virus considerations, you don't want people coming to events that are sick. And so it needs to be pretty easy to back out of an event, especially for, if they're feeling sick. I can issue a refund if you want. A couple of other us can do that as well. It was pay with a check. Just ask them if they want it destroyed or what. Okay. And we actually have a conflict resolution procedure. I've never seen this. I suspect it's probably most likely to show up with refunds, but just be aware there is a procedure. 1, the event planner tries to resolve it. 2, the vice president gets involved, and I've got to tell the president what we're planning to do, and ultimately it would probably be the president that determines it. But I've never seen this, and hopefully we won't have to see it. Okay, this is about advertising your event. And how do people know that you're going to do an event? And there's a number of ways, and you need to use them all. No one way is ever fully effective for any method of putting out information. We have a newsletter, and we used to do 6 times a year. I think the budget's probably going to drive us to 4 times a year this year. I put both contingencies down on this slide. But once you get the event pieces all put together well enough, you do an event write-up, and what I've been doing these days is I do a very short write-up to use for emails, and then I do a long and in detail write-up to use for motorsport registration for the event sign up, and then I use the longer one for the newsletter. I might edit that down a little bit too, but generally the newsletter has the information in it. The motorsport registration has all the information in it, and the email should have a very short blurb so that all the words don't deter people from looking at it. Okay, so we use the newsletter. The newsletter editor will typically give you, since he has the event schedule and who the planner is, he'll typically give you a prompt. But if we're doing pop-up events at shorter notice, he may not have that. So event planners should be cognizant of the newsletter and write up a thing and prompt the newsletter editor to make sure he gets it. The emails, constant contact, typically maybe a month out, but it kind of depends on the event. If you're doing something unique or something that is expensive or something that people have to take time off for work, then you might want to publicize it way out and then follow up a couple of times. So it all kind of depends. But I'm fairly convinced constant contact is one of our most useful ways of putting out information. Newsletter editor usually sends these out. I can do it for you as well, but the event planner needs to be sensitive to the timing and what goes in these. And I know you've seen me send some things out, including about this meeting, where I was a little concerned about having enough people. And so that might drive you to send another prompt out to remind people of the event. Let me reiterate, these should be short. You need to think about your subject line. It needs to be catchy so people actually click on it. And this and the newsletter should have a link in it to the motorsport registration sign up page to make it really easy to click and sign up. But remember, even emails, which are really pretty effective, only about 50% of emails get opened. So remember, there's no one means of communicating will ever get all the information out. So you have to be repetitive and you have to use all your means. Now the website's another one of our means, and Diana does a great job as webmaster. I don't do such a good job of always informing her of our flexible event schedule, but she will ensure, if she knows about the event, to make sure that it's on the website and people use our website to see what our events are. And honestly, I don't think I've ever posted anything to mbca.org, so I think Diana's probably doing that because they seem to be showing up there, and I thank her for doing that. But don't forget that. That's another tool that people use to find out about events. And then there's the other social media like Facebook, like Instagram. And Ruben manages that for us, and he's very good at that. He knows much more about this than I ever will. But the Facebook is really handy. It's very flexible. You create an event on Facebook, people see it. Use the link in there too as well to make it easy for people to sign up. And as long as Ruben knows about these events, he'll really kind of take care of this. But if you don't see it going up, prompt him or post it on Facebook. And the other piece of this is during the event you can post pictures. After the event you can post pictures and comments. So it's kind of fun. I mean, I actually posted a picture of the waterfall at 10 o'clock in the morning on our waterfall run last Saturday from the waterfall. I mean, you can just do stuff like that. It's really kind of fun to publicize the events that way. And pay attention to your registrations. You will get, as an event organizer, you'll be able to see motorsport registration. So look at how your registrations are going. You'll get email notifications. And like I said, don't let motorsport registration scare you. Diana, Doug, Steve, Joe, I will all help you with this if you have an issue or question with it. Okay. You can use motorsport registration to send emails to everybody. And sometime as the event gets close, you're going to want to send an email with the final details of the event. When? Well, it kind of depends on the event. For big weekend events, maybe a week or two out. For smaller VTC events, maybe a couple of days out. And what kind of things do you put out? Well, think about what you'd want to know and when you'd want to know it. If you start getting inquiries about the event, then maybe you've been a little bit too late put that at the info. But put together the information you think you'd need to know and put it all out, and then give them plenty of time to ask questions. Now I'm going to go through a few of the motorsport registration reports, and you're not going to learn from this. So I'm going to blow through this pretty quickly. You learn this from actually doing it and playing with it. And I tell you, I'm still learning stuff. But there are some reports on the registrations. You see when you first come in, you see this. And this is useful. If you go down in here, this one tells you how many people are registered, and that's the number I always kind of want. It can be a little tricky. If you get into events where people have registered and then canceled, or registered and there's some guests, it can be a little tricky to make sure that this number is really right, because it doesn't really always count the guests the right way. So I often go over into click on the registrations here and go over and look at the registrations, and then I use one of the reports down here. This is all active registrations, and I don't find this one as useful to give me the numbers as I do the all active registrations with custom data. Now this slides in here to show you that this is where you go to look if you put some questions in the form about, what kind of car do you have, or other things. This is where the questions show up, the all active registrations with custom data report. But all the way over to the right in the fields, there's one that says guests, and you can actually see who else is signed up. And I often go in and just physically count to make sure that the number that I have is right. The other way to get the numbers right is to go down to the financial reports. One of these, event package and inventory report, and the financial report that gives you the money, it usually gives you the right number of people because it tells you how many people are paid, and that's usually has to do with how many people are actually coming. This report, the one with inventory, also gives you, if you've asked questions about what kind of food they're going to have, this kind of gives you the numbers of all that kind of stuff. So blasting through that, like I said, you pretty much have to poke on motorsport to actually understand how to use it. Now, day of event. Well, if people are paying to come, you probably got to check them in to make sure that those folks are actually the ones that paid. Make sure you have them sign a waiver if it's one of the events that you have to sign waivers for. We have been guilty of forgetting that sometimes. Give out that terms of participation. The other thing is think through keeping the event on schedule. I mean, if you're doing a couple of tours and you have to go between a couple of places, you really have to make sure that, the first tour of the day goes on schedule so you don't fall behind for the rest of the day. And so that's kind of an event planner thing to follow the schedule and, prompt it if it's a tour or something like that. And the other piece is just always, be available to solve issues as the event planner. You often see me with my little Bluetooth in my ear and my phone ready to go because people call you up and ask questions, and it's kind of your job to figure out the answer to those questions. Be flexible. Things never go exactly as you planned, and it's not the end of the world. You can get through it, and it'll be fun. And remember, it's fun. Also, you want to keep the venue happy. A lot of these places we're going to end up going back to, and you want them to leave with a positive impression of Peachtree Section MBCA or MBCA in general. So you really do want to keep the venue happy. And it's important to remember to smile. Sometimes it's pretty complex, and maybe it can even be a little stressful. Smiling helps. Okay. At the end, you're going to want to get reimbursed if you put some money out. So this is kind of how this works. We have a neat form right here that I can give you a blank copy of. It's actually a spreadsheet, and you use a report from Motorsport Registration, which is one of the financial reports, and it'll show you how much money came in, which kind of goes up here, and then what service charges Motorsport Registration charge you, which kind of goes over here for this form. And do not be intimidated by this form. I will help you fill it out. If you don't want to fill it out, I'll fill it out for you. I mean, don't let this deter you from running an event. We will help you do it if you need help doing this. So don't worry about that. But it actually is pretty straightforward. And since it's a spreadsheet, it kind of also, is kind of fills itself out. I have seen reimbursement requests that had invoices that didn't have prices on them. So make sure that your invoices actually have the numbers on them. One of those popped up in our audit this year, which was kind of interesting.
The other thing, which we ran across, Gary, with the thing we were doing with the gathering, was just having receipts that had additional purchases on them. If you can keep away from that, it makes it a lot easier, especially with if there's food items involved because the taxes are different. And
Yeah, that was one of my receipts, in fact, I think. And one of the things that makes it easier for the treasurer is if there's stuff on it that you're not asking for reimbursement for, line them out, cross through them, make it very clear to the treasurer what you're really doing. And I think I was guilty of not making that clear enough. So I
yeah,
take
one of mine was like that too. So
It happens all the time, Dean. It happen as a treasurer, it happens all the time.
yeah.
it should be very clear. In fact, I usually put a cover letter on it to try to explain to the treasurer what I'm doing. Let's see, I've got a question from Brandon. Let's see, it says, I don't think it's a bad idea to ask people to sign up for an event such as the recent driver training course if everyone adding a little more money makes it possible to do the event. If there are not enough people signed up. Yeah, I might even price an event such that it has a little extra cushion in it. And then if I got plenty of people, I might actually refund part of the registration fee. And that you can always do things like that.
Well, or if you have excess money as well, it's a good time to invest in, door prizes. Who doesn't love to have something, right?
Yeah.
Give some of it back if you've got a bunch of extra money.
Yeah, well, that I don't mind putting in our treasury too, because you can always spend it on other events. Some of our video teleconference events have actually made us some money, and we needed it.
Well, yeah, we did in that case, but that's sometimes when I'm doing events and everything, I'll look at what I've got and and that's where I'll give away gift cards and stuff like that. People love gift cards.
Okay, so
that could easily be a question too, right? Just on the form itself in motorsports. If you were willing to, if we didn't get the minimum required, would you be willing to spend some additional money to have the event?
yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, certainly.
I tell you, Dean, that's a lot better than having to go back on your knees to all the signups and ask for more money, which we had to do once.
Well, we've had to do that a couple of times. We had to do that in Hilton Head. Jane, I mentioned that this is a case of where the MSR fees were not properly accounted for, and there were big costs for dinners and everything. And so we ended up having to go back and ask for more money, as well as raffle off some stuff to make up some differences of money. So not all a great situation.
Yeah, big dinners are a challenge.
They are a huge challenge.
All right, so after your event's over, we like to include a post-event write-up in the newsletter. And I've seen a lot of these post-event write-ups, and I've seen a lot of them that didn't do very much for me. What I really want to do in a post-event write-up, not just say, 17 Peachtree members went to so-and-so and had a lot of fun. I like to say something about the event. If you've seen what I write up about tech sessions, I try to say something about what we learned in the tech session. Remember what the objective of these post-event write-ups is. It is to encourage the people that didn't come out that time to want to come to our next event. And so I think you have to dangle something in front of them that they missed, something that was fun about it. What's something you learned on the event, something you saw on the event that was just really unique, like the cannon firing that we did at the Columbus event, for example. So remember your objective. And also encourage, upload pictures onto the Facebook page, encourage participants to upload pictures on the Facebook page. The more stuff that happens on the Facebook page, the more popular the Facebook page is. So use it. You see, I use it a lot nowadays. Ruben's kind of encouraged me. And wrapping up the event, if thank yous are appropriate, send thank yous. And if I think about it, I like to do a post-event survey. I didn't put one together for this, but I'd like to generally pretty much always do some type of user feedback survey for the event, because I'd like to kind of adapt the notion of continuous improvement for the event. So I'd like to know what could be improved about each of our events. So think about putting together a survey. We've typically used Google surveys for that. Diana's been very good about throwing those in for us and then compiling the results. I understand it's not too hard, but even paper surveys are effective if you hand out to the participants in the event. So think about post-event surveys as a method of improving the events. And of course, then just kind of get ready for your next event. Okay, so this is a pause for questions here. Are there any questions over what we've gone over? I'm looking over at chat. Okay. Well, I don't see questions popping up, and I don't see hands popping up. So generally what I planned here is that we'll do a little short break, and Diana's going to organize us into breakout groups. And let's see, I can come out of this screen share, can't I? So what we're going to try to do in the breakout groups is try to come up with events and dates and event planners. And then I, as the arbitrator of the calendar, once we come back to the main room, we'll start throwing these things on the calendar. And you've noticed that I've gotten some inputs from folks beforehand, and so there's a fair amount of stuff on the calendar. And how do I maintain the calendar? I do it on my iPhone that I carry in my pocket, so you can consult with me pretty much anytime on dates. I am willing to share that calendar with anybody with which I can share it, which pretty much means you have to have iPhone or iCloud. But if you want me to share the calendar with you, let me know. I'm glad to do that, and I can do it right now. And I've got an iPad open with the calendar up, and I can do iCloud and show you the calendar on the screen as well. And so with that, if there aren't any questions, I'd like to go ahead and break up into groups to brainstorm from events. I might pop into different groups, and I'm available to consult with on dates. And I've got the calendar up in a couple of different ways, and I can even share it with you. Questions, comments, concerns?
I'm still working on creating the breakout rooms. Okay.
All right. I need to run off to the bathroom anyway, so I'd like to leave VTC up and take 15 minutes or less break, and then come back and we'll be in breakout rooms.
Gary, before we go, a quick comment.
Okay.
This is Diane.
Diane, okay.
There was mention of saying up front, if an event looks like it might not go, would you say, are you willing to pay more for it up front or more to make the event go? I think that having been a part of the event in Hilton Head where they did have to come back for more funds, I think it's better to plan the event, and then if you need to go back for more funds, then ask for it. If you say up front, would you pay more if it needs to be to make the event go, then it's selling the event short. It sounds like you kind of don't think it really has momentum. It doesn't really, you don't think it's going to go. It doesn't make it come across in a positive way that makes people want to sign up for it and participate. So I think it's better to, if circumstances are that you needed 25, you've got 23, then go back and ask if people would be willing to pay more, as opposed to advertising it up front as a week event. So just my thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good point. And one of the beauties of the way we do events is that type of decision is going to be left up to the event planner. And so, two different events, Brandon may want to do it one way, you may want to do it the other way. We'd actually see which worked out best. And depending on different circumstances, one may be best for one and one may be best for the other. So the answer to most good questions is it depends. And that's, I think, probably one of them.